Welcome to special episodes of Shades of Us. We're looking back at some Afro-Latina guests whose journeys we've encountered. I am Gisela Sanders-Alcantara. As mestiza, meaning mixed race of Hispanic and indigenous of the Americas, we want to be perceived as who we are, with all our parts, like Janel Martinez, who wants to be recognized as who she is.
There's definitely misconceptions around what it means to be a Black Latina. I think for one, oftentimes people even just separate it, like, oh, you're Black and Latina. It's like, there's no and. It is one of the same. My name is Janel Martinez. I am a native of the Bronx, and by way of Honduras, by way of St. Vincent, technically by way of Africa. Both of my parents are immigrants to the US. The Bronx has had a huge impact on how I identify and really just how I operate as a person. It's the home of one of the largest Garifuna communities outside of Honduras. To give a brief history of Garifuna people, essentially we were en route to be enslaved, but the ship got shipwrecked and we actually revolted and ended up in St. Vincent. We were there for many years, but then we became, through fighting, not internal fighting, but like colonial fighting, we were exiled. And so that is why today you will see Garifuna people along the coast in Central America. So that is Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Belize, and even to this day, still in St. Vincent. When you're from an immigrant community, a lot of times you'll come to a place where you know has been okayed by your people, right? Like knowing that like this is a safe space for people to come to. And for a lot of the Garifuna community, it's really been the Bronx. There's very distinct aspects of the culture. The fact that we put a lot of coconut in our foods, whether that's everything from the soup with machuca, which is hudutu in Garifuna, keke, all of these like very distinct foods. And also the music, so punta, wanagua, like all these different dances. The language is a mixture of like Arawak, Black Carib. A misconception sometimes that when someone is from a Latin American country, like all they speak is Spanish. There's tons of other languages. So for me, Garifuna was that language that my parents spoke to each other. And even though I don't speak it fluently, I definitely understand because that was just the main way they communicated, and same with my grandparents. Growing up as an Afro-Latina, it's interesting because we didn't necessarily have that term, but this understanding that we were Black was definitely evident in my household. You know, my she's definitely the main person that always said to me, like, Janel, you're a Black Hispanic. Now, I don't refer to myself personally as Hispanic, but at the time, that's something that she always told me. There was never this like, you're just Latina. It was like, girl, you are Black. Even though someone may not be like born in Honduras, but like their parents are, you know, Garifuna, or their grandparents are Garifuna, we are seeing a difference in like how people resonate with the culture. And that happens with, I think, Latin American immigrants to this country too. Like, how are we preserving culture in a space that tells you to assimilate most times? But that still doesn't like negate your cultural lineage, I feel. And I definitely see a big reclaiming of Garifuna culture amongst like myself and peers. We are looking to preserve all of those things because we know that at the end of the day, it's connected to Africa, which is just very oral, so we're writing it down. The language wasn't even written down until 10 years ago. A level of like reclaiming the culture. Within virtually every Latin American country, there are Black folks, because we do know Black is not monolithic, like you can be from anywhere. To be a Black Latina essentially means that you are from a Latin American country, but you acknowledge your African roots. And so that's why, folks like myself use Black Latina as a description, because it's really acknowledging like we're Black, we've been Black, but we also just so happen to be from a Latin American country. I am a journalist and an entrepreneur, and a lot of folks know of my work through my website called Ain't I Latina. I started the website in December of 2013. Ain't I Latina is a digital destination that celebrates and highlights Afro-Latinas, Black Latinas, so Black women essentially from Latin America or of Latin American descent. At the time, I was actually writing for a business publication, specifically talking to African American entrepreneurs. And one thing that I noticed, a lot of them were like, all we're doing is solving a problem. In my mind, I was like, here I am interviewing these amazing entrepreneurs, and I know of a ton of like problems that I feel like I could solve. And being someone that grew up flipping through tons of magazines like Essence, Ebony, Jet, Latina, People en Español, like all these publications, watching a lot of TV, I just really wanted to see my complete self. And I say that because I saw parts of myself. But then when I would flip to Latina, I'm seeing, someone that may share my last name, or someone that is from Latin America but doesn't look like me. When I was writing about entrepreneurship, I was like, okay, this is actually my sign to start this website. And I really just thought it was gonna be something that like a few of my friends or like cousins would really enjoy. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to like press send or launch on this and see what happens. But what I quickly realized was like people following us on social media, leaving comments, and we're really just like, wow, like thank you for, sharing your story, but also a big part of Ain't I Latina is really sharing the Black Latina narrative. There are, profiles that we've run on, folks that identify as straight, queer, different socioeconomic backgrounds. Like, it's really about finding that space that's for you. A large percentage of my audience are, self-identify as Black Latinas. Many of them are between the ages of 25 and 34, and I know this because of like analytics, which is awesome. And also a majority of them are in New York City.
Hola mi gente, it's Janel Martinez, creator of Ain't I Latina, and you're here watching the 2018 Afro-Latino Festival of New York. Stay tuned for several interviews we have coming.
So in terms of kind of being a voice in regards to identity and creating my website, Ain't I Latina, it's something that I'm still, even 4 years in, getting used to. I love creating safe spaces for Black women of Latin American descent and Black women as a whole. But we need to also showcase the importance of having like allyship with other people that are not necessarily, self-identify in that same way, as long as they get it.
Afro, Latinx, Latina, all these terms are really the product of colonization. It was designed to kind of create this sort of separatist ideas, but and this is also too why there's a movement and people that use the term Afro-descendant, right? So it doesn't matter if you're African American, Caribbean, Latinx, whatever you define yourself as, you're just of the African diaspora. And I will say, because of like a lot of conversations that I'm involved in, I've had to really analyze like the terminology that I use. So I do identify as Afro-Latina or Black Latina, but because of some of the newer conversations that are happening and also further realization of things, I also identify as Negra.
There's definitely a generational element to the conversations happening. It's always important, I feel like, to recognize that a lot of these conversations are not new. The constant evolution of technology has really heightened the visibility of the conversation. And so sometimes people are just oblivious to it because it doesn't affect their lives. So of course they don't really like focus on it, but like at some point you have come into contact with someone that was a Black Latino, whether you knew it or not. And so the term is not new, the experience is definitely not new, and our history tells us it's not new because we know the transatlantic slave trade and the majority of slaves were brought to Latin America and the Caribbean. So like all this information is not new, but the way in which it's disseminated, the way in which it's shared, the way in which it's discussed is far more public than it has been in previous years. And I think that's really like what has brought the conversation to the point that it is today. But if we don't know our history, if we only are going based off of what is shared via hashtag, like that's not gonna fare too well. It's important, but we can't negate like the history of the movement as well. When it comes to identity, I would view it as a group endeavor. There are so many people that inform your identity. I'm definitely the embodiment of a lot of women that have come before me. When I am speaking to what I'm seeing in terms of like visibility amongst Black Latinas and to be honest, like Black Latinx folk across the board, is just the lack of visibility, which essentially you're erasing us from the culture.
Cultural difference in style is a good form of expression. Let's watch how Mekita Rivas connects that through writing and fashion.
Growing up in a place without a lot of cultural diversity is challenging. For starters, you feel like an outsider all of the time, and you aren't really sure where you fit in. I'm Mekita Rivas. I'm a writer based in Washington, D.C. Originally, I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm Filipina and Mexican. In the case of being multicultural, the struggle is kind of having one part of your identity attached to one culture and another part of your identity in another culture, and you never really feel totally whole. And I always struggled with feeling like I was not Mexican enough or Filipina enough, especially because I didn't speak Spanish or Tagalog. I not only grew up in a place without a lot of cultural diversity, but I didn't grow up in a very big family. I just had my parents and then an older half-brother who's 12 years older than me. So in many ways, I kind of grew up as an only child. I just didn't have a lot of peers who were like me, who were my age and who maybe understood what it was like to have, two parents who were immigrants from two totally different parts of the world. So there was just always kind of this like disconnect, I think, that I felt with those around me. Once I went to high school and it was a public school and there's no dress code, all of a sudden it was a whole new world. But coinciding with that was all of the typical adolescent, grief of just trying to fit in and make people like you. And I quickly noticed that one way to do that was through how I dressed. Just wearing the same mall brands that everybody was shopping at and the same logos and things like that. Looking back, those outfits are definitely not me. I wouldn't wear them today, but it was sort of a pathway to that sense of belonging. So there were just a lot of barriers that existed there for me to feel complete in terms of my cultural identity. I wrote about going through what I describe as a chola phase, which is interesting to think about because at the time I didn't think it was a phase. It was actually right around the time I was going through preparations for my quinceañera, so I was about to turn 15, and I just felt like I needed to be as Latina as possible and as Mexican as possible, and so I saw some of like the Mexican kids at school and like how they were wearing big hoop earrings and red lipstick and channeling sort of that stereotypical chola look. And so I instantly identified that as like, oh, this is a way for me to belong. This is a way for me to prove that I'm Mexican enough or whatever. That's just one example of how I've gravitated toward fashion to provide me with a sense of identity. Fortunately now, over 15-ish years later, I am at a place where it's the opposite. I choose what I wear, and my sense of style is defined by the life experiences I've had up to this point. And it's less about reaching for trends or reaching for certain looks to provide that identity for me. That's one thing that I appreciate about Jane the Virgin. That's one of my favorite shows in general. I really admire the fashion because Jane is an everyday Latina. She's not a stereotype or a generalization. Through her fashion, we get a sense of her just as a normal woman, albeit if you're familiar with the show, she goes through a lot of crazy situations, but she just has this approachability about her that I hadn't seen before with other Latina characters on TV. I think that fashion is a great entryway into heavier topics because fashion is approachable. It's something that we all put on every day, regardless of whether you consider yourself a very fashion-forward person. It's like we all wear clothes. And the fact of the matter is that fashion is political, something we're seeing a lot of lately when you look at the current socio-political landscape. You have the First Lady wearing a jacket that says, "I really don't care to you." And, that is a perfect example of when these two worlds intersect and how much of a conversation can come out of those two worlds sort of colliding. So I think it's important to recognize that fashion isn't this sort of superficial world that is relatively inconsequential. There is definitely a lot that's happening there that affects very serious things from politics and beyond. One of the first pieces that I ever published was after this election, "I don't owe anyone my silence or unity," and it was a personal essay that that ran in Bustle, and that was a big launching point for me, and I started to do more work for Bustle, and then that kind of led to other similar women's focused sites, and then it was Glamour, and then Teen Vogue, and so all of these opportunities have come my way, which was unexpected, but it's been really fun. I just feel really proud of the unique story that I get to tell, and we all have that. Whatever it is. I think for me, my multiculturalism is a big part of that, but for other people it could be other aspects of their lives. But if anything, I just feel so happy and proud that it's something that I can be an advocate for.
Scholar Vanessa Valdes uses her work to look into her cultural identity and pass that on to others. Let's take a look.
On the islands of Puerto Rico, they like to say that, there's no such thing as racism. They don't see race. We're all part of the great big Puerto Rican family. And then you notice that there are varying shades of melanin. My name is Vanessa Valdes. I am a professor at the City College of New York. My research interests are the literatures of the African diaspora in the Americas. I have an undergraduate degree in English. I have a master's in Spanish, a master's in Portuguese, and a double doctorate in Spanish and Portuguese. Diaspora, for me, is that I look at the cultural productions of Black people across this hemisphere in the Americas. I am Afro-Latina. Both of my parents had a white Puerto Rican parent and a Black Puerto Rican parent. My father's family came to this city in 1938. He was born in 1939, so it was his parents, his grandparents. My mother came in the 1950s as part of Operation Bootstrap, which was the industrialization effort on the island. First mass migration of Puerto Ricans to New York, 1940s and 50s, to encourage economic investment, and so she was part of that. We joke that my brothers and sisters and I, we're the 1.5. We have someone born in El Barrio, which my father was, which is the spiritual homeland of Puerto Ricans here in this city. And then we have my mom from the island. Being Black and Puerto Rican, to me, means always paying attention to that which is not part of the national narrative. It means when you see conversations about Blackness in the United States, I always am attentive to how they're defining Black. Because more often than not, it doesn't include Spanish-speaking people, which is the reason why we get a Cardi B controversy, a Bruno Mars controversy, and a Mara La Negra controversy. It's because the founding of this hemisphere happens under the Spanish flag, and even though the Spanish flag was the first European language spoken here, that's not the history that we're taught here in the United States. We're taught about the Puritans and, Plymouth Rock and Jamestown. We are talking about identities that have existed for millennia. The popular conceptualization of Latinidad is, we're from the 3 races. We're European, and we're indigenous, and we're African. And then the African is often moved to the side, except for if you want some kind of folkloric celebration. Then you'll see women in white skirts dancing to some percussion, and then that's acceptable. But there's no conversation about the maintenance of those traditions. We are coming into a moment where understanding more and more how Blackness and Latinidad are not contradictions. I was an undergraduate at Yale University, an English major, and I cobbled together my English major to be Shakespeare, Chaucer, Milton, Toni Morrison, Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison. And then one day, my 3rd year, there was a visiting professor who was teaching a course that was cross-listed in English and Spanish called U.S. Latino Literature, which I didn't know what that was. And so I said, okay, I'll take that. And there was another course, and it was Afro-Hispanic Literature. Both of these classes were cross-listed in English and Spanish. They changed my life. The first full-length book that we read was Perry Thomas's Down These Mean Streets. Perry Thomas was born in 1929, and he was talking about growing up in Spanish Harlem, having a father that was dark-skinned and a mother who was light-skinned. It was the first time that I saw my family in literature, and questions of color, and questions of identity, and questions of where is home. It was the first time I had to question who I was. And that class was the first class where I saw explicit conversations about Blackness in Latin America. And reading the poetry of Tato Lavieda shattered me, who has a poem called New Yorican, where he says in Spanish, we preserve our customs better than you do. And he's talking to islanders, and he's saying, we didn't ask to come here. Economic conditions forced us here. But you can't tell us we're less than you. Fairly quickly into that class, I went to the professor and said, I want to know more. The way that we learn about Puerto Rican history in New York City is Operation Bootstrap, 1940s, 50s. We don't learn about 1890s. We don't learn about Cuban and Puerto Rican exiles who were fighting for independence. Arturo Schomburg is known primarily for this center, primarily as a Harlem Renaissance archivist. He is probably the most famous Afro-Puerto Rican that lots of people didn't know about. It was important to me that he be at the center of a narrative. My book is called Diasporic Blackness. It is because in every space that Arturo Schomburg inhabited, every space, whether it was as a Freemason, whether it was as a collector, as an archivist, as the president of the first Black intellectual society in this country, the American Negro Academy, he was always talking about Spanish-speaking areas. So at this time, the push to be quote-unquote American was assimilation in this country and the assimilation narrative in this country, which is you leave your ethnic identity behind, right? This is not to say that he did so, and in fact, his life's work testifies to the fact that he did not do this. The reason for Arturo Schomburg's collection was he thought that bringing together all of these evidence, this data, attesting to Black excellence. He had various copies of Phyllis Wheatley's poems. He was taking in everything, collecting documents and pamphlets and prints and photographs, everything that talked about, that demonstrated not only Black folks' humanity, but also that they have always excelled. And the idea behind that was that if we show them that we are human and that we excel, that they would recognize our humanity and that they will treat us equally. And we're not there yet, still.
That is our special show for today. To learn more about the people you just saw, log on to our website at tv.cuny.edu and find our show. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Shades of Us.